The morning mist clung to the windows of the small cottage like a shroud, mirroring the cold silence inside. Elena Vance sat at the scarred wooden table, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped porcelain mug. Across from her, Julian, the man she had supported through 7 years of medical school and lean residencies, adjusted his silk tie with practiced arrogance. He didn't look at her, he looked through her, as if she were a piece of furniture that no longer fit the aesthetic of his new, gilded life. For months, he had whispered the word jinx under his breath every time a deal fell through or a promotion was delayed. Now he was saying it out loud. He claimed her presence was a shadow over his bright future, a lingering scent of poverty that he needed to wash away. To Julian, Elena wasn't a partner. She was a relic of his struggle he wanted to forget. Look, it's not just the bad luck thing. It's the vibe, Elena. You're okay with being average. I can't have that anchor dragging behind me. I'm going places. High places. And you're just embarrassing. He tossed a set of legal documents onto the table. They slid across the polished surface, stopping inches from her trembling hands. It was a divorce settlement, one that offered her a pittance for her years of sacrifice. He had hidden assets, moved money, and ensured that she would leave with nothing but her clothes and the old, heavy iron key she kept on a string around her neck, a keepsake from her late father, a man Julian had always mocked as a penniless tinkerer. Elena didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply picked up the pen and signed her name, her dignity the only thing he couldn't take from her. Exiled to the outskirts of the city, Elena moved into a derelict workshop that had once belonged to her father. The neighbors whispered as she hauled boxes through the overgrown weeds. They saw a woman discarded, a bad luck charm who had finally run out of time. But inside the dusty walls of the workshop, Elena felt a strange sense of peace. The air smelled of oil, aged cedar, and old dreams. She remembered her father's constant tinkering, his quiet smile as he worked on things no one else understood. He had always told her, "The loudest steel is the weakest, Elena. True strength is found in the silence of the forge." She didn't have much, but she had her hands, her father's tools, and the mysterious iron key. She spent her nights cleaning the rust from the machines, her heart slowly mending with every turn of a wrench. One rainy evening, while scrubbing a grime-covered floorboard in the back office, Elena noticed a peculiar pattern in the wood. It matched the intricate wards on the iron key her father had left her. She shoved the debris aside. Beneath the grime, steeled out a reinforced hatch. It took 2 hours to pry open. Inside, it wasn't gold. It was better. Blueprints, prototypes, the hum of a climate control system still running on a backup loop. Dad wasn't tinkering. He was building the future. The second lie was even more dangerous, because the man Julian mocked had actually spent his entire life building something the world was not ready for. A visionary engineer who had created the future of sustainable energy. He had kept them hidden, waiting for a time when the world and his daughter were ready. The patents alone were worth a fortune, but the technology itself was priceless. It was a legacy of innovation that could change the world's energy landscape forever. Elena didn't rush to the press or flaunt her discovery. She moved with the same quiet grace she had maintained during her marriage. She spent months studying her father's notes, teaching herself the complexities of his designs. She realized that Julian had been right about one thing. She wasn't ordinary. She was the guardian of a revolution. Using a small portion of the initial royalties from a minor patent, she began to restore the workshop, turning it into a state-of-the-art research facility. She hired local craftsmen who had been laid off, people the world had deemed unlucky just like her. She didn't look for flashy investors. She built her empire on the foundation of hard work and mutual respect. The Starlit Foundry was born, a name honoring the late-night talks she once had with her father under the open sky. Within a year, the Starlit Foundry became a global sensation. Elena's silent turbines and high-efficiency batteries were being implemented in cities across the continent. Yet, despite her soaring net worth, Elena's lifestyle remained remarkably unchanged. She still lived in the modest apartment above the workshop. She still wore her father's old work shirts when she was in the lab. The media was fascinated by this enigma of energy, a woman who avoided the limelight and donated millions to education and housing without ever seeking credit. She wasn't driven by the desire to prove Julian wrong. She was driven by the desire to do right. Her wealth was a tool, not a crown. She had found a way to turn her bad luck into a beacon of hope for thousands of others. Meanwhile, Julian's bright future was beginning to flicker. He had used his divorce settlement to invest in a high-risk real estate venture that collapsed under the weight of a massive fraud scandal. His new wife, a socialite who had only been attracted to his perceived power, left him the moment the bank accounts were frozen. Desperate to maintain his status, he tried to pivot into the green energy sector, only to find that every door was locked. The industry was dominated by one name, Vance. He assumed it was a coincidence, a common surname. He spent his remaining savings trying to get a meeting with the CEO of the Starlit Foundry, hoping to beg for a consultancy position or a small partnership. He had no idea that the embarrassment he had discarded was the one holding the keys to his survival. The day of the meeting arrived. Julian spent 2 hours grooming himself, trying to hide the exhaustion and the cheapness of his now fraying suit. He walked into the glass-walled boardroom of the Foundry, rehearsing his pitch about synergy and market expansion. When the CEO turned around, the words died in his throat. There sat Elena, looking radiant not because of expensive jewelry, but because of a profound inner peace. She looked at him with neither hatred nor joy. Her gaze was as clear as a mountain spring. Julian froze. He blinked, looking at the door, then back at her. Elena? Wait, hold on. This is your office? You were broke. You were a curse. Elena didn't smile. She just tapped her pen on the desk. I was convenient, Julian. There's a difference. Julian began to ramble, his arrogance replaced by a pathetic, desperate groveling. He talked about their shared history and how he had always pushed her to be better, claiming his cruelty was actually a form of tough love to spark her ambition. He asked for a job, a loan, anything to keep his head above water. He even had the audacity to suggest they could try again, now that they were both successful. Elena listened in silence, watching the man who had once been her entire world crumble into a heap of excuses. She saw the hollowness of his character, the way his soul was tethered entirely to the opinions of others. He hadn't changed at all. He was still the same man who valued people based on their utility. I won't give you a job, Julian, Elena said, her voice steady and firm. Julian's face fell, the desperation turning into a flicker of his old rage. But before he could speak, she continued. However, I am aware that your mother's medical bills are mounting and that your childhood home is in foreclosure. Julian gasped, shocked that she knew or even cared about such details. I have purchased the debt on your mother's house, she said, sliding a folder toward him. It is now paid in full, and she will have a stipend for her care for the rest of her life. As for you, I have set up a trust that will cover your basic living expenses. Nothing more, nothing less, on the condition that you never contact me again. Julian stared at the documents, his hands shaking. He had expected a legal battle, a public shaming, or at the very least, a door slammed in his face. He hadn't expected mercy. Why, he choked out. After everything I said, after how I treated you? Elena stood up, walking toward the window that overlooked the bustling workshop floor where workers were laughing and creating. Because seeking revenge would mean I'm still living in your world, Julian. I've spent too long being defined by your bitterness. This isn't for you, it's for me. I'm choosing peace. I'm choosing to be the person my father knew I could be. She turned back to him. You called me a jinx because you couldn't handle your own failures. I'm letting you go so you can finally face them. As Julian was escorted out by security, he walked past a wall of photos documenting the Foundry's history. He saw pictures of Elena working in the dirt, Elena shaking hands with world leaders, and Elena laughing with the children at the local orphanage she sponsored. He realized then that her luck hadn't changed, her environment had. When she was with him, her light was smothered by his ego. Without him, she had become a sun. He stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. He had the house and the stipend, but he had lost the only thing of true value he had ever possessed, the loyalty of a woman who was too good for him. Elena didn't turn it into a legend. She turned it into a job. While the papers called her the silent billionaire, she was busy wiring grids in places the world forgot. She didn't need to shout. She just needed the lights to turn on. Her father's workshop grew into a campus of innovation, But the original building remained untouched, a sanctuary where Elena would go to think and remember where she came from. Years later, Elena sat in the same spot where her father used to sit, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of violet and gold. She was no longer the woman who trembled at a dinner table. She was a woman who had redefined what it meant to win. Justice hadn't come from a courtroom or a physical blow. It had come from her refusal to let Julian's cruelty change her heart. She had kept her kindness, her integrity, and her quiet strength. She had proven that the greatest wealth isn't what you have in your bank account, but what you have left when everything else is stripped away. The iron key still hung around her neck, a reminder that the most important locks are the ones we place on our own potential. The legacy of Elena Vance wasn't just in the machines she built or the money she gave away. It was in the silence she mastered. She had turned a narrative of victimhood into a testament of triumph. As the stars began to poke through the evening sky, Elena felt a deep sense of completion. She had faced the darkness, walked through the fire, and come out not scarred, but forged. Once, Elena was told she was a curse, a jinx, a shadow that followed Julian wherever he went. Those words had lived inside her for years, like small, quiet wounds that never fully healed. Even when she smiled, even when she worked, even when she tried to believe, she was more than what he said she was. Some labels don't just hurt you in the moment, they move in and start to live inside your thoughts. But here is what Elena finally understood. Some people don't ruin your luck. They block it. They stand in front of the light you were meant to walk into and convince you that the darkness around you is your fault. They tell you that your dreams are too small, your voice too soft, your presence too inconvenient. And after a while, you begin to believe them. Not because they are right, but because they are loud. Julian had been loud. Elena had been quiet. And for a long time, the world mistook his noise for power and her silence for weakness. But silence is not weakness. Silence is where strength waits. When Elena finally walked away, nothing magical happened. No fireworks, no applause, no instant happiness. What happened was much more subtle and much more powerful. The air felt lighter. The room felt bigger. And for the first time in years, she could hear her own thoughts without someone else telling her what they should be. That was the moment her life truly began. Not when she became wealthy. Not when the world started calling her the enigma of energy. Not when Julian stood in her boardroom, finally realizing what he had lost. Her life began the moment she stopped asking for permission to exist. Because freedom doesn't arrive when someone finally treats you well. Freedom arrives when you decide you deserve to be treated well. And Elena had made that decision the day she signed those papers and walked into the rain with nothing but an iron key and her dignity. For years, Julian believed Elena was holding him back. But the truth was much simpler. He was standing in front of her future. He was the wall, not the wind. Once he was gone, her path was no longer blocked. And everything she had buried inside herself, her intelligence, her courage, her creativity, her quiet determination, finally had room to grow. People like Julian don't steal your destiny. They just delay it. And Elena's destiny was waiting patiently. Maybe that's why her success felt so natural. Not because it was easy, but because it was always meant to happen once the wrong person was no longer in the way. She didn't become powerful because she got rich. She became powerful because she got free. Free from being small. Free from being blamed. Free from carrying someone else's fear as if it were her own. And that is a kind of wealth no one can ever take from you. Years later, when Elena stood by the window of her workshop and watched the city glow with the clean energy she had helped create, she didn't feel proud in a loud way. She felt something softer. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you did not betray yourself. She still wore her father's old work shirts. She still kept the iron key around her neck. Not because she needed to remember where she came from, but because she needed to remember who she was. A woman who kept going when she was told to stop. A woman who believed in her worth when someone else tried to erase it. A woman who chose to walk through the hardest door of her life and found herself on the other side. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes, the door that hurts the most to close is the one that saves you. Because on the other side of that door isn't just a new life. It's the life you were always meant to live.